Okay, this one's gonna be a doozy.
Do you want to shout Demetrius?
Oh yeah, Demetria! It's video number 3. This seems like as good a time as any to get a little bit real. This video is for spanking fetishists who are in relationships with non-fetishists. And before we dive into this conversation too much, let's unpack my own baggage first. The great love of my early life was a guy named David. Some of you have read about him. He shows up a lot in my articles and even in my book. David's a normal guy. He likes sex, which, to be fair, is exactly what most people like. When I first outed myself to David as a spanking fetishist, his initial reaction wasn't great. He said it's not a big deal, but in this really dismissive, condescending way. He even compared me to Tobias Funke, the never nude from Arrested Development.
There are dozens of us. Dozens!
In hindsight, that says a lot, I guess. But love is a tricky pickle, and I loved him. I told him that it would be dangerous to minimize the gravity of my disclosure. I told him that it was a big deal, and we would need to take it seriously. He told me he wanted to marry me. I wanted to marry him, too. I spent the next few years of my life writing dozens of articles and even an entire book all about spanking, sexuality, and what it's like to live with a paraphilia. I wrote all of them for him. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I just tried hard enough, he could both love me and see me at the same time. I asked for a smack, not a snack. No. It didn't work. Near the end of our marriage, I remember he yelled at me, "I feel like I married a lesbian." His phrasing was clumsy, of course, but I have to admit I understood his point. He felt like he married someone with an incompatible sexual orientation. And I had no good comeback. After all, I did write the book calling my sexuality an orientation. Literally. One of the last things David ever said to me in person was, "The spanking thing is weird." So while there's never only one reason a marriage ends, it would just be wrong for me to pretend that it wasn't a major factor. The whole experience broke me, and I still haven't healed. Maybe I never really will. I'm just not the same person now that I was before. But despite that, I still do truly believe that it is possible for healthy, loving, long-term relationships between spanking fetishists and non-fetishists to work. But there's a catch. We'll get to that. Before we do, though, you should know that a lot of people don't think it's possible for these kinds of relationships to work. When I reached out to other people to ask for their opinions, my inbox flooded with stories and perspectives. They were grim. I'm not sharing these opinions to try to scare people. I'm sharing them to emphasize the point that this issue demands work and must be taken seriously. I'm not the kind of person to say you'll get hurt just because I got hurt, and the people who wrote those messages aren't dumb or unreasonable. When we say this is a tricky road to walk, it's worth hearing us out. In my opinion and experience, both after having been through it myself and after listened to all of these stories from other spanking fetishists, I think there are 3 red flags you need to look out for when navigating a relationship between a fetishist and a non-fetishist. Let's talk about them. Red flag number 1, he's not really vanilla. These days there are 2 words I try to avoid completely: kinky and vanilla. That will come up again later in future videos, but for now, suffice it to say, these words have become meaningless. These days, everyone is kinky. No one is vanilla. It's become cool to say that you're super into kink, even if what you're super into is sex, with a little slap and tickle thrown in for fun. In most of the stories I've heard and lived about failed attempts to make relationships between fetishists and non-fetishists work, the phrase, "he's not really vanilla," comes up. But terms like vanilla and kinky have become both too broad and too vague. It's too easy to use them to obscure the fact that there are real differences between fetishists and non-fetishists, and those differences are meaningful. To make these relationships work, you'll need to be honest, specific, and precise, and the words vanilla and kinky are none of those things. Rationalizations like "he's not really vanilla" might help you avoid the issue for a few years, but sooner or later it's going to come up. He's not really a spanko either. Red flag number 2, I'm not really a fetishist. This one hits close to home. So many of us try to change our sexual identities. We try to fix ourselves as if there is something to be fixed. My friend Kwai Franklin tells a really sad story about his first marriage to a non-spanko and about the futility of trying to change yourself for love. He says, "I was still in the frame of mind that there was something wrong with me and that I needed to figure out how to change myself to be normal. I had just graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I had long held the belief that people can change if they employ the correct techniques and methods. I tried retraining my sexual response using 2 methods. The first was I tried to fantasize about spanking while making love to her so that I could stay aroused. My hypothesis was that eventually I would no longer need to fantasize about spanking and my body would simply respond to her. This failed, of course. The second method I tried was to not think about spanking at all. This failed as well. My need to spank was always there." I really hate how many of us have stories like this. Sexuality, to use Shakespeare's words, is an ever-fixed mark. Conversion therapy doesn't work, even when we try to do it to ourselves. Even when we try to do it to ourselves for love. Red flag number 3, it's not that big of a deal. Look, you might be able to lie to your partner. You might even be able to lie to yourself, but you can't lie to me. I'm one of you. And you and I both know that having a fetish is a big deal. It's not what people imagine, is it? It's not some kind of sexy foreplay. It's an identity and a lifestyle, and it is a really big deal. It's discipline. It's scolding and bruises and corner time and all of those dark spaces of our psychology that we don't want to talk about. It's mouth soaping. Yeah, it's amazing how quickly the insufferable chorus of "whatever, it's no big deal, everyone's into spanking" dies down as soon as I bring up the mouth soaping. Here's my opinion, and after reaching out to almost every spanking fetishist I know who's in a happy, successful relationship with a non-fetishist, I have to admit I was pretty blown away to discover that they all pretty much have the same opinion I do. And this is it. To make that kind of relationship work, you're going to need to be open to the probability, that's probability, not possibility, of opening the relationship up. Maybe not today, but someday. People can't suppress a sexual identity forever. Sooner or later, you're going to both need to acknowledge that the other has needs that you can't necessarily fully satisfy. You can teach a person to swing a paddle, but you can't teach a person to discipline. You can teach a person to call you sir or ma'am, but you can't teach someone to take the kind of spanking that most spanko tops want to give. And you can't teach the vibe. Look, this is an opinion. It's okay if you think I'm wrong. Opening a relationship up means different things to different couples. On one end of the spectrum, it might just mean that the fetishist goes to spanking parties and plays with trusted friends. This is so common in the spanking community that it's not even considered ethical non-monogamy. I know tons of couples who both play with other people at spanking parties and still consider themselves monogamous. On the other end of the spectrum, it might mean full-on polyamory and having long-term relationships with secondary partners. But under whatever labels they want to assign to whatever point on the spectrum they choose, this is how I see relationships between spanking fetishists and non-fetishists working out. I don't think this is a bad or pessimistic thing, and it really bums me out when society frames it that way. Satisfying some physical, psychological, or sexual needs with trusted partners in a consensual and ethical way, and under mutually agreed upon boundaries, is okay. In fact, I think it's really healthy and beautiful. And it has been the key to making a lot of spanko, non-spanko relationships work. But what exactly does opening a relationship up mean in a spanking context? How can you do it ethically? Is cheating even cheating if there's no sex involved? And hey, what's up with those spanko couples playing with other people at parties and still calling themselves monogamous? That's what's up next. Stay with me.